All right, so we're going to dive into exploring data in Chapter 1 for statistics here. So we're going to be looking at analyzing categorical data. We'll get into the quantitative in the next section. So we've got these learning goals, these learning objectives. We're going to split this into two parts. We're going to look at constructing and interpreting bar graphs and pie charts, and then talking about good and bad graphs. The two-way tables and after, we're going to look at that in the second video. So categorical variables place individuals into one of several groups or categories. They're categories, they're not numerical. And what we look at is the values for our variable are the labels for the categories. So we can make a frequency table, which you see here, or a relative frequency table, which is here. And the frequency table shows us counts of things. The relative frequency table shows us percents of the whole. So we have our variable, which is the format of the radio station. The values that that variable takes on are categorical. They're adult contemporary, adult standards, contemporary hits, so on and so on. And then we either see a count for the relative frequency or a percent for the relative frequency. And one thing to note is that the count should add up to how many things total we had, and the percent should add up to 100. Now, why doesn't it add up to 100% here? Well, sometimes when we round off these percentages, so we take 1,556 and divide by 13,838, that's where the 11.2% comes from. Sometimes that round off causes us to be a little bit different, but that's okay. So the way we display categorical data, instead of a table, sometimes it's real nice to use a picture to show our stuff. So for a frequency table, we usually use a bar graph. Bar graphs are used for categorical data. The bars do not touch, and each bar represents a different one of the categories. The height is the frequency. It's the count of how many things fit into that category. For a relative frequency table, we'll often use a pie chart. Each slice of the pie represents the percent of 360 degrees that fall into that category. A lot of times these things can be generated very quickly using technology. These were both generated using Microsoft Excel. A pie chart very, very rarely is going to be drawn by hand. A bar chart, yeah, a bar graph we can do pretty easily. Pie chart takes quite a bit more work calculating and then measuring the angles for each one of these slices. And this is really the attitude that a lot of people have about graphs. I didn't have anything useful to say, so I made this pie chart, and everybody's blown away by the chart. And then, well, that worked too well. They're blown away by this graph. They don't really understand what it says, but it looks really cool. We really want to focus on reading the graph and knowing what it means. Personally, I would say pie graphs, pie charts are the least effective way to communicate information. So, some bad things about graphs. They're real easy to mislead with. Bar graphs, we compare the heights of the bars. But our eyes are going to react to the area of the bars as well as the height. So we have to make sure that we make the bars equally wide. We have to use a consistent scale on these graphs. We should avoid the temptation to replace the bars with pictures because this can be very misleading. And here's an example for DirecTV. DirecTV is right here, Dish Network, cable. These are bar graphs representing the number of channels that they have. But when you look at DirecTV, whoa, that thing's way bigger than the rest of this, than the Dish Network, than the cable. This one has so much more, but really, it only has 14 more channels, but the area that we're drawn to is right here. It's so much bigger than Dish Network. We think there's so much more, but there really, really isn't compared to what there is in Dish Network. The other thing you have to be careful with when you draw a bar graph is the vertical scale. When you draw a vertical scale, You need to start at 0, 10, 20, 30. You can't start at 20, 30, 40 because we're ignoring the whole bottom part of our data, and that can make the bars look significantly different than what they really are. So all of that is stuff to keep in mind as you look at graphs and make graphs. And in the next video, we're going to look at two-way tables.